Welcome to another Friends in Wonder podcast, a place where we invite you to wonder with us about meaningful topics without judgment or limits. Brought to you by two lifelong friends looking for insights through a lens of how can this help?
I'm Joe Luther.
And I'm Vince Kern, and we're your hosts. Now let's wander and wonder together. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Vince, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, man.
It's a great day.
Oh, man. It's fall. You can feel it in the air.
It's almost fall, but yeah.
Well, you're right. A few more weeks. Leaves are kind of starting to turn.
School buses are driving around now.
Yeah. And then, there's the whole question of whether the Lions are going to win more than a couple of games this year.
Not much of a question to me, Vince.
And hey, it's also time for you to start getting ready for hunting, isn't it?
Getting back out into the woods. Yes, indeed. I'm very excited, very pumped up about it. And I'm also pumped up that we decided to tackle the issue of the ethics behind hunting, because I got to tell you, very often when I'm at a family get together or a neighborhood party or just talking to somebody down the street about what I'm doing this weekend, when I tell them I'm going hunting, sometimes I sense less than an embracing reaction.
Some furrowed brows, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea. There's a lot of people who have very strong opinions about what hunting is, and I thought it would be a good episode to, especially given the time of year and the fact that I will be spending more time doing this over the next couple of months, I thought it'd be a good topic of conversation. Certainly something that we can incorporate into our theme of wonder, and that is, the ethical considerations of hunters. And, very often, one of the responses that I get from people are, "You're going to shoot Bambi." And so we all know, even older boomers than us grew up with Bambi movies. And so this idea that the hunter shoots Bambi's mom and Bambi becomes an orphan as a result of it, is ingrained in so many people's heads. And, the other thing that I get is they're just too cute to shoot. And, because you see deer running around the neighborhood, and they are beautiful animals. But I just thought it would be good to explain my point of view, maybe in a give and take way with you, about the ethical considerations of hunting. And, I don't know. I guess the best place to start for me is I personally hunt wild animals, wild game for the food. And I think that in and of itself is a very, very ethical thing. And especially if you compare it to the kind of meat that most people eat that comes out of a grocery store. Most people don't want to think about it. That's why they call it beef instead of cow. But most people just don't want to think about where that meat, what happened to the animal that they're eating. They don't even really want to think about it. That's the first part about it. But the reality is, I don't know, have you ever seen that movie, Food Incorporated?
Is that the one where they talk about the processing of food and how it goes from?
Yeah, I think it was about 10 or 15 years ago. And it was very difficult for a lot of people to watch. In fact, I think it might have created a lot of vegans after people watch it. But it's this whole idea of the mass production of animal meat. Mm-hmm. And so that includes cows for sure, and chickens. And so, I guess what I'm getting at is that when somebody says to me, "Oh, you're going to shoot Bambi," or, "Oh, maybe they're judging in their mind, but maybe hopefully not with their mouth," I don't get a lot of visceral response, but I certainly get a feeling that people don't like it. And I know that I've had friends who have hunted with me for the first time, and they post a picture on Facebook of their successful hunt, and they get tons of negative responses from people. But what I guess I'm getting at is they're getting those responses from people who go to the restaurant and order their filet mignon rare and don't give any thought to what happened to that animal or how that animal was harvested before they ate it. They just, in a way, pass judgment on the hunter because he goes out and shoots this wild animal.
It sounds to me like the discussion of the morality or the ethics of hunting is very similar to the divide that we have with our, I'll call them high level discussions, politics. And it's a divisive topic because it doesn't seem like we spend any time communicating different viewpoints with each other.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm hoping to do with this episode is maybe talk a little bit more about, my viewpoint about why it's a more ethical thing than what people tend to judge it by.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I guess my first thing is I just think it's hypocritical to say that you're against hunting if you're a meat eater. Like, I have a real hard time with that. It makes no sense to me. You have to have some sort of a disconnect going on in your head to not believe that the meat that you're eating had to be killed before you ate it. I mean, I would hope it was killed before you ate it. So that's like one of my fundamental objections that I have. I get it if you're a vegan and you don't like the idea of eating another animal or what they say, if it has eyes, I'm not going to eat it. I get that because it's consistent. If you're truly not going to eat an animal from the store or from the wild, and you've got that as a personal philosophy, I'm okay with that. I do like to ask vegans, do you think the plants that you're eating have feelings? And I know that's kind of a tricky question, but I mean, really, eating and surviving, eating and maintaining your body as a living organism is messy business.
Right.
You got to eat something that was alive. You eat a plant or you eat an animal. And there's a lot of research out there that says plants have feelings. I know I play music to the plants in my house, and they say that there's some beneficial, and then they talk about the symbiotic nature of the trees and forests and all that, so that there is more to it than just this idea that, I don't want to hurt another living being. Well, I don't know. Anything that you eat is a living being. But I get it. If you're against eating animals in general, then I don't have a problem with you being against hunting because that's a consistent thing. But what really bothers me is when people will go to the grocery store and order, USDA choice beef and then go home and have some kind of judgment about venison or whatever it is.
Yeah, and those animals that are being processed to become the beef that you buy in the store, they don't have great lives.
No, that's exactly, I mean, some of them do. And we know, like, a lot of people are trying to eat grass-fed or open range or, cage-free chickens and that kind of thing. Because I think the impact of movies like Food Incorporated, and there's been a whole bunch of them since then, has brought, and probably PETA, but there's been more attention brought to the inhumane way that we farm animals. But yeah, I mean, very often, chicken that we all eat from fast food restaurants is genetically modified chicken. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the wild game that I harvest or hunt is they're not genetically modified animals. These are wild animals. And what I really like to tell people is that, most people won't be judgmental against a farmer who processes a cow or a pig or whatever animal. They're not judgmental because, hey, that farmer has been farming and taking care of those animals, and that's part of his business. Well, I like to think of myself really as a wildlife farmer. The land that I own, and I own 230 acres of land, is designated. In fact, I have a land stewardship designation for this land. So it is designated to be forest for wildlife. And there's no fences. We don't keep these animals in. We actually do a lot to help, promote the herd. But I like to think of myself as really like an open air or an unfenced wildlife farmer, because we're out there, we know from our trail cams, there's probably 30 or 40 different deer that we might see through the trail cams. And in any given year, we might only harvest 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how many hunters we have come up there. So, they are, I guess, getting back to my point, is that these are animals that had a chance to roam freely. They reproduced, they've lived with their family members, all of the things that animals are supposed to do. I enjoy just going in the woods very often just to observe them. But anyhow, getting back to the general visceral reaction, I think, that was the part that I wanted to talk about, is, this kind of hypocritical idea that you can, eat a hamburger and be against people who go out and hunt white-tailed deer.
Yeah. And it sounds too that part of what you're doing with your land is helping manage the herd. And I know that there's departments like the DNR. And I mean, when I was looking into this a little bit, I didn't realize that in the late 1800s, there was almost an extinction of all these animals. And the reason was because they had to supply, that was called market hunting, and they were supplying these meat markets prior to refrigeration and the ability to transport and process meat. But things were almost extinct.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously we know that buffalo and bison almost went extinct, and for sure wild turkey very nearly went extinct. White-tailed deer were on the verge of extinction. Yeah, because there was no regulation. And at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, there were actually the people that ended up preserving these species were in fact wild game hunters, conservationists, because they saw that these animals were, because there was no regulation, were quickly becoming extinct. And so fortunately, there were a number of laws that were enacted. Well, for instance, I think one of the first acts was the Migratory Bird Treaty Act or whatever, that designated birds that cannot be hunted. And, obviously the eagle was one of them. I think the eagle was on the verge of extinction. I don't know really firsthand whether people were eating eagles or not. But certainly, there's an obvious reason to preserve the eagle. But they also wanted to regulate all these other birds that really weren't worthy of hunting. Some states you have doves that are legal to hunt, in other states they're not legal to hunt. In Michigan, they're not. There's a number of sandhill cranes. In some states you can hunt them, other states you can't. Ducks and geese, everybody knows. But you have to do it in a way that is sustainable. And what the hunting, the regulation of hunters brought was a sense of order to it all. And more than that, even by regulating hunting, it was also a way to raise funds through the licensing of which species you hunt. There's stamps that you have to get. In fact, I think there was a law that was enacted that 10 or 11% of all ammunition sales go to conservation of wildlife,
which helps manage the ecosystem and provides more places for these animals to roam and keeps them from going extinct.
Right, exactly. And then there's, on top of that, around the same time, there were a number of associations that were created by hunters, like Ducks Unlimited or the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the National Wild Turkey Federation. There's so many different associations that were created, and the purpose for that was to raise money, to get donations of land, to make land preservation for ecosystems for these various species. Ducks Unlimited have so many designated wildlife territories for these, for their migration and just for protection. There's all sorts of sanctuaries in every state as a result of this, and that's all driven by hunters. Mm-hmm. So hunters really serve a great function for the maintenance of these species. And like I said, I have my 230 acres that is designated as forest so that these animals can live and thrive. And there's just, I don't know, thousands of hunting camps like that throughout Michigan where the animals and the herds are being protected by having this kind of land available to them.
It's a fine balance between protecting something from getting shot between it because it's cute and managing the balance of the existence of an animal. So, I mean, we were talking about this, and the wolves in Yellowstone is an example. What happens in an ecosystem when a particular animal just disappears? Right.
Well, they actually didn't quite understand what the impact of the wolves were in Yellowstone, or really probably in the Great West, until they had the brilliant idea to bring the wolves back to Yellowstone. And when they did, how quickly the ecosystem changed for the better. And you say, what? How can bringing wolves back, a predator back to the Yellowstone ecosystem make the ecosystem better? Well, it was interesting. What they found was without predators, and certainly they don't allow hunting in Yellowstone, then the elk herd multiplied beyond what it's supposed to be in a normal ecosystem. So what was happening is these elk were not being hunted by human hunters or the natural predators, and they were proliferating. And so they had this free reign, literally, to go out on the range and just nibble the prairies down to a stub, so much so that the water runoff when there was rain or snow melts or whatever would then cloud the water runoff into the streams and rivers, and that had an effect on the fish and therefore all sorts of things. But what they found, and they didn't really know all of this until they brought the wolves back, because what they saw within 20 or so years was suddenly now the elk had to do what they're supposed to do. They start hiding. They don't just hang out and graze at will, and they had to go up into the uplands during certain times of years. And suddenly the grass was growing more robust, and the water runoff was more natural, and the fish population started to come back in the rivers. And then the eagle population started, all sorts of wild birds started to come back. And so the domino effect of bringing the predator back to balancing the ecosystem for these animals of prey, these grazing animals, really help restore the ecosystem, kind of proving that you need predators for these animals, or you have the unintended consequence of upsetting the ecosystem.
Yeah, because everything's in balance. So these animals of prey evolved over the years to develop defenses, whether they're eyes on the side of their head, or they're fast, or they're this, or they're that.
Yeah, hooves so they can move around.
It's part of the natural evolution of being preyed upon, and so animals are evolving in that way.
Animals are food. I guess, some animals aren't, but really any animal that dies is going to become food to some other animal. Typically, right? If it's not a bird that's, like a grizzly bear could die. And I'm sure that there will be some, kind of scavenger animal that will enjoy that. So, but animals of prey are ones that have evolved. And I'm not an expert in this, but typically that it's an animal of prey given certain circumstances. Like you said, it's got eyes on both sides of the head or on, each side of the head so it can be hyper alert. Typically, the predators have eyes in the front of their face. Mm-hmm. This is typical. Another thing is more of the camouflaging and coloring, as you said. So perfect example would be rabbits that are white in the snow, and then they can turn a little brown during, the summer months so that they can blend in. That's evidence of being an animal of prey, that you're being preyed upon. Certainly almost all birds are animals of prey of some sort, right? Bigger birds, just like fish. Mm-hmm. Bigger fish eat smaller fish, bigger birds eat smaller birds. And so these animals all, they develop certain characteristics that indicate that they are indeed food to another animal. And, another perfect example is nocturnal animals, their sleep habits. For instance, I learned this interesting fact that I've always remembered, and that's that giraffes sleep in 5-minute intervals, and they sleep standing up.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're just constantly on the alert for predators. So deer do the same thing. Deer actually sleep in strange cycles with the moon, or feed with the cycle of the moon. We know as hunters that if it's a big, bright, full moon evening, that it's probably going to be very difficult hunting the next day, because those animals are smart enough to take advantage of the bright light at night and go out and feed in the evening so that they're protecting themselves against predators during the day.
So this animals of prey thing, and let me first start by saying, I would think a giraffe with those eyes on top of its head way up tall could see anything coming at it. But I guess too, it takes a lot of energy to get that big body moving to get out of the way of a lion, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's times when they're in brush and various things where.
Yeah, so that aside, my little rambling there aside, it's not like you walk out into the woods and just shoot a deer. I mean, this isn't something like there's a lot of hunters that go out that don't come back with anything, right?
For sure.
It's not an easy thing. Yeah. This isn't like just going and, to excuse the analogy, but it's not like going and pulling a pound of hamburger off of the shelves.
No, I wish it were that easy. Well, actually, we've broken down, how much it costs for gear and gun and ammunition and license and all that stuff. And then by the time you finally do, if you're lucky enough to get a deer and you get maybe 40 or 60 pounds out of that deer, depending on the size, we don't like to break down how much we spent versus how many pounds we got, because we would probably be better off going and buying some meat on sale at the grocery store.
Yeah. But this isn't something you take lightly. It's not something, I know you've known you for a long time. You do this for as much for the health value of the meat and the positive value of the meat, but there's also the part of being in nature and, being out there, being part of the natural environment. That's got to count for something.
I think I told you about it, and I think we have it queued up and ready, but I don't know. I think it would be fun to play it as part of this podcast. There's the famous actor, Chris Pratt.
Oh yeah. Chris Pratt.
Yeah. He was being interviewed. It sounds like a British interviewer, but it's one of those, I think you can find it on YouTube or anywhere, but
I think we have that clip.
Yeah, we do have that clip, and he does a great job in his articulate way of describing the experience of what it's like to be in the woods while you're hunting. Should
we ask if Al, our production guy's got that, if he can cue that up?
Oh yeah, I think we've got it queued up.
Can you cue that up
Why don't we give a quick listen to that?
All right, let's do that.
You walk out in the woods and the sun hasn't come up yet, and you just sit in a spot, and your preparation has told you that this is the right spot, and the sun comes up, and you are in camouflage. Nothing knows you're there. Nothing can smell you. The wind's in your face. You're a voyeur to the world waking up. and the wilderness waking up around you in a way that no one gets to see it when they drive their car down the road because they've disturbed it. You've snuck in, and you're just like opening up a window to what the, you know, if a tree fell in the woods and didn't make a sound, you'd be there to witness it, you know, because nobody's there. You're not even there. And then, you know, the sun comes up, the last stars that in the sky go away, and the whole world comes alive. And most of the time you don't get anything, and it's not about the kill, it's just about the journey of being there and the work, you know.
I sense that it was more than bloodlust. That's why I appreciate you sharing this much, because I've never heard it articulated like that, and that's pretty spectacular, if not romantic, in terms of a singular mission and adventure.
Yeah. And then thanks. And then there's the inevitable remorse that you feel. I mean, I'm not cold-blooded. I don't just kill it and then just like not think about it, you know, like you go there and you see this animal, this creature that is 5 years old. For 5 years it's been walking around these woods and you never saw it until today, and then you decided to kill it. And so there's a remorse there, you know. You're like, oh my God, what have I done? And you feel that. But it's combined with all these other, you couldn't boil it down to one emotion. So there is that feeling of that, but it gives way almost immediately to just like this grace, this like thankfulness for it, you know? And then you go to work, and then that's when the work starts. You know, you got 600, 700 pounds of meat laying on the forest floor, and it needs to turn into little bags of meat in your freezer. And that's a lot of work there, you know, and then you just lose yourself in that work.
That was fascinating. He painted quite a picture of the beauty of sitting out in nature and the preparation and the work. And I want to say just right off the front, I don't think hunting is immoral or unethical. I think this is a topic that deserves a common discussion among both sides, those who would oppose it and those who enjoy it. I personally only find hunting morally offensive when I take my car to the shop in November, and I literally had this experience. I was told one time, "Well, the mechanic, you have to wait a month for an appointment because mechanics are out hunting."
Oh, right, yeah, all construction zones.
Yeah,
stop.
everything stops. Right, that's the only problem I have with it.
Actually, in northern Michigan, there are a number of counties that have school days or free days at school for the opening day of deer hunting season.
Yeah, everybody's out hunting, but it's got to be a beautiful experience, and I think he captured it pretty well. But he tried to summarize a whole lot in a few sentences. Joe, what's it like for you?
Well, I love the way, you know, the first thing he talked about was the preparation, and you know, like you said, he kind of glosses, he touches on every point, but there's a lot, you know, it's very pregnant with a lot of information. And the first part is this whole idea of preparation. The excitement that you have as a hunter when you've prepared. And what we do typically is we go into the woods weeks, months before, in my case, sometimes years before, and you get an idea of where the bedding areas are. In other words, where the typical place that they would be sleeping at night. And on our own property, we know over the years where, you know, it's kind of, they like swampy areas. It's very difficult for predators to get into. They can hear very easily if something's coming into their bedding area. So they certainly want to be in an area that, you know, they feel well protected. So we do a lot of preparation in terms of knowing where they're going to be. And we get very excited by the time hunting season comes around, because you see more signs that you can prepare on, like antler rubs, where the male deer will, you know, they have this velvety stuff on their antlers that they rub off on trees and saplings, and they make marks, and so that we call those antler rubs, and that's an indication of the buck being territorial for other bucks to understand. They're also trying to get, you know, the fuzz off of their antlers. So, but it's a territorial thing. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is a good area to set up a good blind or a tree stand or something like that. So again, that preparation takes a long time, and it's part of really understanding the species that you're hunting. And then the way he talks about, it's dark and the stars go away. Well, the night of the hunt, especially the opening day of rifle hunting season, but even the opening day of bow hunting season, which are two completely different things. In Michigan, opening day for bow hunting is October 1st. And it isn't all the way until November 15th that it's opening day for rifle hunting. But everyone gets excited about rifle hunting because then you've got a little bit more of an advantage. You can see a deer further off, and that's within range of you hunting. When you're bow hunting, that deer has to come in very, very close to you because the range for a bow and arrow is typically like 40 or 50 yards. But again, what I'm getting at is the night before, you get out like in the wee dark hours of the morning.
3 a.m.
Yeah, well,
4 a.m.
It depends, on the
5
time.
a.m.
Yeah. But for sure by 5 a.m. and you're out there with a flashlight and light and depending on whether there's a moon out, it can be pitch dark. Sometimes a little bit scary when you go down these paths by yourself because you're hearing other animals running. It could be, a raccoon or whatever, but we're all concerned about black bears in the woods and that. But you're going out there to this spot and you're also trying to do it in a way that isn't disturbing whatever animals it is that you're coming after.
You're in their environment.
Right, exactly. And so then you finally get into your place, and just like he describes, the stars start to go away and the light comes up. I've been in the woods when there's been a frost or a freeze, when you see the kind of ice coating on the twigs of the trees and that. And all at once, as the air starts to warm and the sun comes up, that all starts melting at the same time, and it's fascinating. It's fun to be a part of the woods when it's awakening, and I love the way he described that. And like the whole idea, if a tree falls and no one's there, you are, because people driving by aren't there, but you're there, you're in it, you're seeing it, and so often, I'll see a lot of deer, but they're not the deer that we're out there to hunt. It might be a doe with a couple of, fawns or whatever. But you get to see, I've seen hawks hunting squirrels, just so many things that you get to see while you are this, as he described, a voyeur to the woods.
So it's a very spiritual time sitting there waiting.
Yeah, for sure. And in effect, it's not just effectively spiritual. You are in nature. And I can tell you that it's really interesting. Sometimes you can be sitting in the woods and you hear, leaves rustling behind you. And of course, you don't want to make too many sudden moves, just turning your head around to see what it is. If you do, it could be the deer that you were hunting and you got spotted. So you're very quiet, listening and being patient, maybe slowly turning your head to see what's going on. And after a while, you do eventually turn around and see, oh, it's a chipmunk, or oh, it's a squirrel, or it's a bird fluttering around on the forest floor. Eventually, after an hour or two of this, you start to know, oh yeah, that's just a bird behind me, or, oh yeah, that's something else. And so you really do, your senses become heightened and you get to see and hear and use your senses in a way that you never do when you're in a house, right? So for instance, one of the reasons I fancy that I'm a pretty good hunter is and I think humans in general are really good at spotting movements that don't make sense. Like you can be looking at the woods in front of you and suddenly you see like a shadow move in a far off area that you can see that it doesn't make sense. Like, okay, if there was wind, that whole area would have been moved, but you just saw a movement in a very specific place. And so I get very ultra focused on movements and that kind of thing. And before long, really, you are part of the forest. You really are, like he said, part of the forest.
So you're sitting there and, I mean, let's play this thing out on a great day. You're going to take a deer
It's funny you say that. Many guys in our group will come in the morning and say, I had a great hunt. And they don't have anything. They didn't shoot anything. Mm-hmm. They saw, mama doe with her little ones. They saw a coyote chasing something. They saw whatever. There could be a whole host of things that you could see in the woods. It could be a bunch of porcupines. It doesn't matter. But if it's an exciting hunt when you get to see wildlife that didn't know you were there, because you're really just experiencing it like it's supposed to be.
Which is something that maybe that's why they shut the schools down up in the UP, so that families can experience that together, right? Well, your son also hunts, right? You've had experiences with him.
My dad didn't hunt, so I didn't have that experience of the intergenerational hunting, but many people who I hunt with, in fact, sadly, a good handful of the guys that I hunt with, their father, have now passed. But I can tell you, every time we go hunting, that it's just rich with either mention of their father or, discussions of how their dad and they used to do it when they were kids and that kind of thing. And that gets passed on to, like you said, I have a son that hunts with me, and my friend who I hunt with, who's my age, has a son that hunts with him. And eventually when they have kids, and it isn't just a man, father-son thing, because there's daughters out there and there's grandmas out there. There's all sorts of people that get out there and hunt. And I'm involved in an association. It's a nonprofit that, when I say I'm involved, I've been to a number of their fundraisers and I support them. It's called Passing Along the Heritage, and it's a Michigan-based nonprofit. And it's kind of like almost a Make-A-Wish foundation for hunters. Mm-hmm. And so they will sponsor hunts for people who are wheelchair bound, quadriplegic, paraplegics, wounded warriors, even kids that, come from environments where they just don't have the resources or the ability to do it. And the idea is to give more people this experience with nature. And in fact, one of the big concerns about hunting today is that there's less and less hunters. And, I think the new generation, this younger generation of kids, they certainly love to play virtual hunting games, mm-hmm. but actually getting up at 3:30 in the morning and trudging out in the woods and maybe enduring a little cold or that kind of thing. Not all kids are as into it as they used to be, because, there's so many other ways, I guess, to entertain kids. And back, 100 years ago, this was something that everybody looked forward to being able to. They have youth hunts. They have what they call Liberty hunts, and this is in Michigan. So a youth hunt is a specific weekend where you can take, I think they have to be 14 years old or younger. And there's all sorts of rules, but it gives them an opportunity to be successful in the woods before everyone else goes trudging in there and scaring the animals to hiding again. So the idea is to try and encourage today's youth to get more involved in hunting, because there's so much good that comes out of hunting. And I don't even think we've covered it all yet, Yeah. We talked about the money that's raised to help preserve the species, but one of the other things that hunters do is we provide information to the departments of natural resources or the wildlife agencies, federal wildlife agencies. Whenever I hunt a particular kind of migratory bird, I send feathers to the National Wildlife.
What are they for? What's the purpose?
They're trying to determine. I'm sure now that they can test things genetically. They're trying to keep track of the migratory patterns of various species. They want to know if there are, because they call some of them are resident species. So typically, for instance, a woodcock is a bird that migrates, but some of them stay put. So they want to keep track of how many are staying put.
Helps them manage.
Yeah, help them with information. We do the same thing with white-tailed deer. They want to know certain things about the age of deer and whether they have any kind of internal issues like diseases or whatever, that kind of thing. So we provide a lot of information as well as revenues for maintaining the species. And like I said, the land and all the various things. Me personally, our land, like I said before, We groom that land. I put in food plots. So these are natural, like fields in the middle of the woods that grow various things that they like. We've put in apple trees. And when I put my apple trees in, it isn't just so that the apples will fall out in the middle of the fall so that I can, catch a deer that's underneath the apple tree. Funny enough, most of those apples fall long before rifle season, but we also have species that produce apples very, very late in the season, or crab apples, for instance, that they tend not to want in the regular season, but they stay on the ground and they're very robust. And in the middle of the winter, that's the food that they're foraging for to keep them alive in the middle of the winter. So things that we do as hunters really help preserve the herd.
Sure, they might die from starvation.
Yeah, well,
they might die from something else.
Hey, do you know what the number one predator of white-tailed deer in Michigan are?
No.
The automobile, Vince.
The automobile.
That is a fact.
We hit them with our cars more than anything other that takes care of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there aren't as many. We don't have any wolves. I think in the UP there might still be a few wolves, and they may have brought them back, and I think they're starting to do well. But coyotes are the most typical. Coyotes and black bear are the most typical predators of deer, and there just aren't as many of them anymore. And certainly in the metropolitan areas, the suburbs of big cities like Detroit, wherever there's woods or cemeteries or, just like universities or whatever that have big woods as part of their land, the deer all congregate there. There's nobody to stop them or to, no predators to reduce the numbers. And so they run around in the street and get hit.
So contrasting a couple of things here, because I've got a question, but I'm setting it up. You've got deer being hit by cars, and you've got deer being hunted, and one is a very spiritual preparation experience. I mean, I keep getting back to it's not like somebody who hunts is just running out in their shorts with a gun going bang, 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 bang. There's a certain spirituality about it.
Yeah, like Chris Pratt said.
So when you take a deer, I mean, but it's still got to have an impact. When you take a deer, there's still the taking of that animal's life. So,
yeah,
talk to me about that. What's
well,
that
and
like?
that is one of the things that I thought he did a pretty good job of describing too. Is the remorse or the gratitude, and it is both. There's something called buck fever. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it can happen to the best of us. It happened to me really the last couple of times I've hunted. Last year it was probably one of the biggest bucks that I ever shot. No, not probably. It was definitely the biggest buck I ever shot. And I knew that I was dealing with a pretty big deer before I even put my rifle up into the scope. It was the wee hours of the morning of the first day of rifle hunting season. And just like Chris said, I had prepared for a spot that I thought might be a good one. And these are not defenseless animals. They are unarmed animals. I grant you they don't have guns and they don't shoot back, but they're not defenseless. They know what's going on around them. They have the greatest sense of smell and the greatest sense of sight. And I saw this thing in an area where I was kind of expecting, it might be because it'd been marking some territory, and it was still kind of dark, and I was pretty sure that I was seeing a big rack on this guy's head, and my heart just was pounding like you can't believe. And it wasn't pounding because I was about to have my biggest deer. It was pounding because this is a majestic animal. It's an impressive animal. And like Chris Pratt said, it probably 5 years old. And there's a whole lot of things going on in your head when you see this. But also, this animal's going to die one way or another. And he had already been through the mating season. So he's already done what he's supposed to do. And yeah, it was my time to harvest that deer And when I put my gun up, I'm telling you, when I went to see it with, the scope to really get a good feel, it was light enough at this point to get a good feel of what I was looking at, and I saw the big rack. Oh yeah, it's a scary, it's an intense moment, and then. Well, he said 600 pounds. I've never had to deal with 600 pounds of meat. He must be shooting elk or moose or something. I have no idea what he's doing with all that meat. Ours is more, I think the animal itself it might be 200 pounds total, maybe a little bit more. But when we do actually have a successful hunt, at least for me, my shaman wife gave me a great present. It's a leather, like little satchel that I put tobacco in, and tobacco is kind of like this traditional Native American way of offering back to nature when you take something from it. And so the idea is when this animal has been taken from this environment, you don't just take it, right? Well, I mean, some people do, and that's okay. But I personally give reverence to this animal. And so I'll take out a little bit of this tobacco and spread it between my hands and make a gesture of giving back to the ground next to this animal and say a prayer of gratitude and honor it that way. And of course we eat the meat I'll tell you, by the end of a season, if our herd is really up, if we have, just a lot of deer running around, and we very often will thin the herd a little bit more and take the meat to local food pantries for people who don't have enough money for food. So there's a lot of good that you can do with it, and it isn't just, as Chris said, it's not a bloodlust thing. It's a real, I guess, like you said, a spiritual experience.
Everything is connected to everything else. And if you believe that, I can't imagine, Native Americans used to have ceremonies at the end of the hunt for what they've taken in gratitude.
Right.
It's not something that's new. We were hunter and gatherers at one point.
Yeah, I mean, they have evidence that we've been hunting and eating meat, human beings, for at least 2 million years.
So it's, in a sense, part of our culture. And I suppose you could argue that it's part of what we do as human beings. It could be set in our DNA to some degree. The evolution of it certainly is that it's become more identified with sport than sustenance. But I don't know that that's really what motivates most hunters. I think most hunters are probably motivated by the spiritual experience, by the connection with nature, by the food element of it. And as you've, I think, adeptly pointed out, there are benefits to hunting. And so you find yourself in these situations.
Yeah.
And it's every year probably comes around, or that inadvertent, you're at a wedding in the middle of the summer talking about hunting. And I go back to what I said at the beginning. I think it's one of those situations that unless you explore it from an open-minded point of view, you're going to be, and we did a podcast on this previously about positional correctness. You're going to be set in your positional correctness when you're dealing with the aspect of it.
Yeah. And look, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong to eat meat, because everyone has their own choice of what they want to do. I am saying if you're a meat eater and you're an anti-hunter, you might want to
maybe learn a little bit more about what actually happens.
Yeah, think it through a little bit more.
Yeah.
No, good. I think I feel like it was a pretty good discussion. I'm glad that we, kind of dug into it. We could probably keep going on many aspects of what we talked about.
And maybe we will in the future.
Yeah, it was fun.
This was a great show, and thank you for being here, listeners. And as always, as we will probably say in our outro, we're definitely eager to hear your thoughts and feedback on any topic.
Yes, indeed. This was a fun one.
Well, so ends another episode of Friends in Wonder, and we really want to thank you for listening.
If you'd like to listen to more episodes, provide feedback, questions, or even suggest topics you'd like us to wonder about in future episodes, be sure to check us out at friendsinwonder.com.
We'd be grateful if you subscribe, like, or share this podcast.
Until next time, I'm Joe.
And I'm Vince.
And we're Friends in Wonder.